The dark clouds on the horizon threatened as Finn Reeves rode his dun stallion across the rugged Montana plains, his body aching from 3 days in the saddle. The year was 1875, and the unforgiving wilderness of the Western Territories had worn him down to his last reserves. He'd left the silver mines of Nevada after 5 brutal years, his pockets heavier but his soul emptier than when he'd arrived. Now, with nothing but open country between him and his destination of Lewiston, he pressed forward despite the coming storm. That's when he saw her. A lone figure slumped against a fallen cottonwood, one hand pressed against her swollen belly, the other waving weakly at him. Even from a distance, he could see she was in distress. Finn approached cautiously, his hand instinctively moving to the Colt revolver on his hip. Years on the frontier had taught him wariness. But as he drew closer, he saw only a young woman with copper-colored hair, her face pale with exhaustion. "Madam," he called, tipping his hat. "You all right there?" Her eyes fluttered open, revealing irises the color of summer sage. "Water," she whispered, her voice cracked from thirst. "Please." Dismounting with practiced ease, Finn reached for his canteen and knelt beside her. Up close, he could see her dress was torn and dusty, her boots worn through at the soles. And her belly, she was heavy with child, perhaps 7 or 8 months along. "Here you go," he said, holding the canteen to her lips. "Not too fast now." She drank gratefully, some water spilling down her chin. When she'd had her fill, she leaned back against the tree trunk. "Thank you, mister. I thought I might die out here." "Name's Finn." "Finn Reeves," he said, replacing the canteen cap. "What's a woman in your condition doing out here alone?" A shadow crossed her face.
Nora.
"Nora Matthews. I was traveling with my husband to Lewiston. We had a wagon, but—" Her voice caught. "3 days ago, bandits attacked us. Thomas tried to fight them off, but they shot him. Took everything, our wagon, our supplies. Left me with nothing but the clothes on my back." Finn scanned the horizon, noting the darkening clouds building to the west. "Storm's coming in fast. You can't stay out here." He paused, calculating. "Lewiston's still a good day's ride, and you're in no condition to make it before that rain hits." Nora placed a protective hand over her belly. "The baby's not due for another month, but I've been feeling pains. Nothing regular yet, just warnings." Finn removed his hat, running a hand through his sun-bleached hair. At 32, he'd encountered just about every kind of trouble the frontier could offer, but a pregnant widow on the verge of giving birth wasn't something he'd prepared for. "There's a stand of trees about half a mile east," he said, pointing. "Might be able to rig up some shelter there before the storm breaks. You think you can ride?" She nodded determinedly. "I can manage." Helping her to her feet, Finn was struck by how light she felt despite her pregnancy. "When's the last time you ate, Mrs. Matthews?" "Yesterday morning. I had a few biscuits the bandits overlooked." Finn's jaw tightened. "We'll fix that soon as we get to those trees." He helped her onto his horse, then took the reins and led the animal toward the cops he'd spotted. The first fat raindrops began to fall as they reached the trees, a mixed grove of pine and aspen that would provide some natural protection. "Hold tight," he told Nora, helping her down and settling her beneath the broadest pine. "I'm going to build us something to keep the worst of it off." While Nora rested, Finn worked with focused efficiency. He'd survived enough prairie storms to know what they were facing. Using his knife, he cut pine boughs and young saplings, arranging them into a lean-to structure against a fallen log. He covered the framework with his oilskin coat and saddle blanket, creating a small but effective shelter. The rain intensified as he worked, soaking his shirt and plastering his hair to his forehead. By the time he finished, the downpour was beating a steady rhythm on the makeshift roof. "Come on," he said, helping Nora to the shelter. "It ain't much, but it'll keep you dry." Inside, the space was cramped but secure. Finn pulled his saddlebags in after them, extracting jerky, hardtack, and a small pouch of coffee. "I'll get a fire going soon as there's a break in the rain," he promised. "For now, eat something." Nora accepted the food gratefully, and Finn noticed how her hands trembled. "Thank you," she said softly. "I don't know what would have happened if you hadn't come along." "Just luck," he replied, uncomfortable with her gratitude. "Anyone would have done the same." "No," she said, her green eyes meeting his. "Not everyone would." The rain continued through the afternoon, drumming on their shelter. When it finally slackened, Finn ventured out to gather firewood and more pine boughs to reinforce their roof. By sunset, he had a small fire going near the entrance of their shelter, the smoke rising through a gap he'd left in the construction. As darkness fell, Nora's face grew pinched with discomfort. "The pain's getting worse?" Finn asked, concern evident in his voice. She nodded, breathing deeply through what was clearly a contraction. "They're coming more regularly now." Finn felt a spike of fear. "The baby's coming? Now?" "I think so," she whispered. "I'm afraid it might be early." "We should try for Lewiston at first light," he said, calculating how quickly they could travel. "There must be a doctor or a midwife there." Nora grimaced through another pain. "I don't think I'll make it that far." Finn ran a hand over his face, feeling the scratch of 3 days' worth of stubble. "I don't know the first thing about delivering babies." "Neither do I," she admitted with a weak smile. "This is my first." They fell silent, the gravity of their situation settling between them. Outside, the rain had stopped, but the clouds remained, blocking out the stars. "Tell me about yourself, Mr. Reeves," Nora said suddenly, clearly trying to distract herself from the pain. "What brings you to this part of the country?" Finn poked at the fire with a stick. "Been working the silver mines in Nevada. Finally saved enough to buy some land. Got a deed for a small ranch outside Lewiston." "A ranch? You're a cattleman?" "Not yet," he admitted. "But I grew up on one in Texas. Figure it's time to get back to it." He paused. "What about you and your husband? What was waiting in Lewiston?" Her face softened with memory. "Thomas had a job offer. A clerk position at the Mercantile. We married last year in St. Louis. This baby," she placed her hand on her belly, "was our dream for the future." Finn nodded, understanding loss in a way few others might. He'd buried his parents and younger brother after a Comanche raid when he was just 17. He'd been hunting at the time, the only reason he'd survived. "Get some rest if you can," he advised. "I'll keep watch." Nora settled as comfortably as her condition allowed, using Finn's folded jacket as a pillow. Despite her predicament, she fell asleep quickly, exhaustion claiming her. Finn watched her in the flickering firelight, struck by her resilience. Most women he'd known would have broken down completely in her situation. Yet here she was, facing childbirth in the wilderness with a stranger as her only help, and still she maintained her dignity. Morning came with clearing skies, but Nora's labor had progressed. Her contractions were coming faster, her face shining with sweat despite the cool morning air. "Mr. Reeves," she gasped between pains, "I think it's happening soon." Finn felt panic rise in his chest. "We should try to reach Lewiston." She shook her head firmly. "There's no time. This baby is coming now." Resignation settled over him. "Tell me what to do." "I don't exactly know myself," she admitted, gripping his hand as another contraction seized her. "But my mother was a midwife. I've heard her talk." Together, they prepared as best they could. Finn boiled water in his small tin pot and tore his cleanest shirt into strips for bandages. He arranged pine boughs into a softer bed and helped Nora position herself. The labor progressed through the morning. Finn held her hand, wiped her brow, and offered what encouragement he could. When the moment finally came, he followed her gasped instructions, his hands steady despite his fear. The baby's cries split the air, just past noon a robust wail that echoed through the trees. "It's a boy," Finn announced, his voice thick with emotion as he wrapped the tiny red-faced infant in one of the makeshift bandages. A healthy-looking boy. Tears streamed down Nora's face as she reached for her son. "Hello, little one," she whispered, cradling him close. "You're early, but you're perfect." Finn busied himself with cleaning up, giving mother and child a moment of privacy. When he returned to the shelter, Nora was gazing at her son with a mixture of love and sorrow. "He has his father's nose," she said softly. "Thomas would have been so proud." Finn nodded, unsure what to say. "What will you name him?" She considered for a moment. "Thomas, after his father. Thomas William Matthews." "It's a good name," Finn agreed. "Strong." They remained at the shelter for 2 more days, allowing Nora to regain some strength. Finn hunted rabbits, made broth, and cared for both mother and child with a gentleness that surprised even himself. On the 3rd morning, Finn fashioned a sling to carry the baby against Nora's chest and helped them both onto his horse. "We'll take it slow," he promised, leading the horse by the reins. "Stop whenever you need to." The journey to Lewiston took all day, but they arrived just as the sun was setting, the small frontier town appearing before them like a mirage on the plains. Finn headed straight for the doctor's house, a modest cabin near the town's single church. Dr. Wilson, a gray-haired man with kind eyes, took one look at Nora and immediately ushered her inside. "Brave woman," he commented, examining baby Thomas. "And you're a lucky man, Mr. Reeves. Not many men get to deliver their own sons." Finn started to correct him, but caught the pleading look in Nora's eyes. "Yes," he said instead. "Lucky indeed." The doctor arranged for them to stay with the widow Hansen, who had a spare room and experience with newborns. Finn left Nora and Thomas in their care, promising to return the next day after he'd seen to his own business. The land office confirmed his deed was an order 20 acres with a small cabin about 3 miles outside town. The previous owner had started some fencing and built a modest barn. It wasn't much, but it was his. When he returned to town, he found Nora sitting on the widow's porch, baby Thomas asleep in her arms. "How is he?" Finn asked, removing his hat as he approached. "Perfect," she replied. "Dr. Wilson says he's small but healthy."
Finn shifted uncomfortably.
"Mrs. Matthews, I need to tell you something. I didn't correct the doctor yesterday because it wasn't my place, but I want to be clear. I'm not trying to insert myself into your life. Once you're settled, I'll be on my way." Nora's eyes filled with tears. "And where would I settle, Mr. Reeves? I have no money, no family. My husband is dead. I'm alone with a newborn in a strange town." Finn stared at his boots, considering. Finally, he looked up. "I have a proposition. My land needs work more than one man can manage alone. I need help, and you need a place to stay. It wouldn't be proper, a single woman and man living under one roof, but, she prompted when he hesitated. "But if we were to marry, it would solve both our problems. A business arrangement," he added hastily. "You'd have a home for you and your boy, and I'd have help with the ranch. When you want to move on, I won't stop you." Nora studied him, her green eyes thoughtful. "A marriage of convenience?" "Yes, madam. Nothing more." She was quiet for so long that Finn began to regret his offer. Then she nodded slowly. "I accept, Mr. Reeves. For Thomas's sake." They were married the next day by the town preacher, with the widow Hansen and Dr. Wilson as witnesses. Finn wore his only clean shirt, and Nora borrowed a blue dress from the widow. Baby Thomas slept through the entire ceremony. That afternoon, Finn loaded their meager possessions onto a wagon he'd purchased and drove his new family to their home. The cabin was dusty and bare, with just a table, 2 chairs, and a narrow bed. A stone fireplace dominated one wall. "It's not much," Finn apologized, helping Nora down from the wagon. "It's more than I had yesterday," she replied, taking in their surroundings. "And it has potential." They fell into a routine over the following weeks. Finn worked from dawn to dusk, repairing fences, preparing fields, and building a proper corral. Nora kept the cabin, tended a small garden she'd started, and cared for Thomas, who grew stronger each day. They were polite but distant with each other, careful to maintain the boundaries of their arrangement. Finn slept on a pallet by the fireplace, giving Nora and the baby the bed. Spring turned to summer. Finn purchased 4 cows and a bull from a rancher heading north, the first animals for what he hoped would become a profitable herd. Nora's garden flourished under her care, providing fresh vegetables for their table. One hot July evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset, Thomas asleep in the cradle Finn had crafted, Nora broke their comfortable silence. "Why haven't you ever married, Finn? A man like you should have had his pick of women." He considered the question, watching a hawk circle overhead. "Never found the right time, I suppose. Or the right woman. No sweetheart waiting back in Texas?" A sad smile touched his lips. "There was someone once. Mary Beth Calloway. We were sweet on each other before the raid that killed my family. Afterward, I was too filled with anger to think about love. By the time I returned years later, she'd married a shopkeeper." "I'm sorry," Nora said softly. Finn shrugged. "It was for the best. I wasn't the same person anymore." "None of us stay the same," she replied. "Life changes us." He glanced at her, noting how the evening light gilded her copper hair. In the months since he'd found her on the trail, she'd regained her strength. Her cheeks were flushed with health, her eyes bright with purpose. "How did you meet your husband?" he asked, realizing he knew little about her past. "Thomas worked as a clerk at my father's store in St. Louis. He was kind and steady. When my parents died of influenza, he proposed." She twisted the simple gold band on her finger. "It wasn't a grand passion, but we cared for each other." "You loved him," Finn observed. "Yes," she agreed. "Though perhaps not the way stories tell it should be. We were companions more than anything else." As summer progressed, the distance between them gradually diminished. Finn found reasons to linger at the cabin during the day, a broken chair that needed fixing, a shelf that needed hanging. Nora began packing his lunch each morning, including little extras like wild blackberry jam or fresh baked biscuits. In August, Finn traveled to Lewiston for supplies and returned with a rocking chair for Nora and a carved wooden horse for Thomas, who was now beginning to smile and coo at them. "You didn't need to do that," Nora said, running her hand over the smooth wood of the rocker. "Wanted to," he replied simply. "Thought it might make feeding the boy easier on you." That night, as they ate supper, a summer storm broke overhead, rain pounding on the cabin roof. Thomas, startled by a crack of thunder, began to wail. Nora lifted him from his cradle, attempting to soothe him while finishing her meal one-handed. "Here," Finn said, setting down his fork. "Let me hold him while you eat." Nora hesitated only briefly before passing the baby over. Finn cradled Thomas awkwardly at first, then with growing confidence as the baby's cries subsided. "Well, look at that," Nora said with surprise. "He usually doesn't settle for anyone but me." Finn smiled down at the infant. "He's a good judge of character." Thomas gazed up at him with solemn blue eyes, then reached up to grab Finn's beard with a tiny fist. "Ouch," Finn chuckled, gently disengaging the baby's grip. "Strong little fella, aren't you?" Something shifted that evening, a barrier breaking down between them. As Finn handed Thomas back to his mother, their hands touched, lingering longer than necessary. Their eyes met, and for a moment neither spoke. "Thank you," Nora finally whispered, though whether for holding the baby or something more, Finn wasn't sure. The following Sunday, they attended church in Lewiston together for the first time. As they entered the small wooden building, Finn was acutely aware of the curious glances directed their way. Their unusual circumstances had surely been the subject of town gossip. Reverend Parker welcomed them warmly, making a fuss over Thomas, who was dressed in a christening gown Nora had sewn from one of her old petticoats. Mr. and Mrs. Reeves, the Reverend greeted them, and the young Master Thomas. It's good to see you joining our congregation. After the service, several women approached Nora, introducing themselves and cooing over the baby. Finn stood awkwardly to the side until Walter Jenkins, the owner of the mercantile, engaged him in conversation about cattle prices. "You've done well by that woman and her child," Jenkins commented as they watched Nora laughing with the other women. "Not many men would take on another man's wife and baby."
Finn stiffened.
"Mrs. Reeves is my wife," he said firmly, "and Thomas is under my protection." Jenkins raised his hands in apology. "No offense meant. It's just, well, folks talk. We all know she came to town pregnant and widowed." "Then folks should mind their own business," Finn replied, his tone brooking no argument. On the ride home, Finn was uncharacteristically quiet. "Is something wrong?" Nora asked as they neared the ranch. Finn adjusted Thomas, who was sleeping against his chest in the sling Nora had made. "Jenkins said something that didn't sit right with me." "About me?" she asked, her voice small. "About us." Finn guided the wagon into the yard. "People are talking about our arrangement." Nora's shoulders slumped. "I suppose that was inevitable." Finn helped her down from the wagon, his hands lingering on her waist. "It bothered me," he admitted. "Not because I care what they think, but because—" "Because?" she prompted when he trailed off. "Because it's not just an arrangement to me anymore," he said quietly. "Hasn't been for some time." Nora's eyes widened. "Finn, you don't have to say anything," he interrupted. "I know this isn't what you signed up for, but I wanted you to know that I care for you and Thomas. As family." Before she could respond, he turned away to unharness the horses, leaving her standing in the yard, the sleeping baby between them. That night, after Thomas was asleep in his cradle, Nora joined Finn on the porch where he sat smoking his pipe. "I need to tell you something," she said, settling into the rocking chair beside him. "About Thomas's father." Finn exhaled a plume of smoke. "You don't owe me any explanations, Nora." "I think I do." She took a deep breath. "Thomas and I were married. That part is true. But he wasn't a good man. He had problems. With drink, with gambling. The job in Lewiston was a lie. We were running from debts." Finn remained silent, letting her continue. "The bandits weren't bandits. They were men Thomas owed money to. They shot him when he couldn't pay." Her voice cracked. "They were going to take me too, to work off his debt. But another group of riders appeared, and they fled."
Jesus, Nora. Five spirit.
"Why didn't you tell me?" She wiped away a tear. "Shame, I suppose. And fear. I thought you might not help me if you knew the truth." Finn set his pipe aside and moved to kneel in front of her chair. "You and that baby are the best things that ever happened to me. Nothing you could tell me would change that." Their eyes met in the moonlight, and Finn reached up to tuck a strand of copper hair behind her ear. Slowly, giving her time to pull away, he leaned forward and pressed his lips to hers. The kiss was gentle at first, then deepened as Nora responded, her hands coming up to frame his face. When they finally parted, both were breathless. "I think I'm falling in love with you, Nora Reeves," Finn admitted, resting his forehead against hers. "I think I already have," she whispered back. "Fallen in love with you." That night, for the first time, Finn didn't sleep on his pallet by the fireplace. Autumn brought a golden haze to the prairie and a new rhythm to their lives. They were truly husband and wife now, their initial bargain transformed into something neither had expected to find again: love. Thomas grew stronger each day, learning to sit up and babbling his first attempts at words. To Finn's delight, the baby's first recognizable word was "Pa," directed unmistakably at him as he entered the cabin after a day's work. "Did you hear that?" Finn asked, scooping Thomas up with a broad smile. "He called me Pa." Nora watched them with tears in her eyes. Because that's who you are to him. In October, Finn traveled to the next county to purchase more cattle, leaving Nora and Thomas alone for 3 days. When he returned, he found Nora waiting anxiously on the porch. "What is it?" he asked, dismounting quickly. "Is Thomas all right?" "He's fine," she assured him, wringing her hands. "Sleeping soundly. But I need to tell you something." Concern furrowed his brow. "What's wrong?" "Nothing's wrong," she said, a small smile playing at her lips. "But you might want to sit down." Finn complied, settling onto the porch step. "You're making me nervous, woman." "I'm pregnant," she blurted out. "We're going to have a baby." Finn stared at her, stunned. "A baby?" "Our baby." Nora nodded, tears spilling down her cheeks. "Dr. Wilson confirmed it yesterday. Due in late spring." With a whoop of joy, Finn leapt to his feet and swung her around. "A baby? Our own little one." Nora laughed, clinging to his shoulders. "You're pleased then?" "Pleased." He set her down gently, cradling her face in his rough hands. "Nora, I never thought I'd have a family again. You've given me back everything I lost and more." Winter came early that year, blanketing their small ranch in snow. Finn added a room to the cabin for Thomas, who was now pulling himself up on furniture and taking his first tentative steps. The cattle huddled in the shelter of the barn, and smoke curled continuously from the cabin chimney. In the evenings, they sat before the fire, Nora knitting baby clothes while Finn read aloud from the few books they owned. Thomas played at their feet with the wooden animals Finn carved for him, his laughter filling the cabin with warmth beyond what the fireplace provided. "I was thinking," Finn said one such evening, looking up from his book, "about names for the baby." "Oh." Nora set her knitting aside. "Do you have something in mind? If it's a boy, maybe William? After your father?" Nora smiled, touched by his consideration. "And if it's a girl?" Finn's expression grew soft. "How about Mary? After my mother? William or Mary Reeves?" Nora tested the names. "They're perfect." Spring arrived with new life everywhere, calves in the pasture, sprouts in the garden, and wildflowers dotting the prairie. Nora's time grew near, her belly round beneath her aprons. Unlike Thomas's hurried birth in the wilderness, their daughter arrived with relative ease on a warm May morning, delivered by the midwife from Lewiston whom Finn had arranged to stay with them for the final weeks. "She's beautiful," Finn whispered, holding his daughter for the first time. "Look at all that dark hair." "Your hair," Nora observed tiredly from the bed. "And your chin, I think." Mary Elizabeth Reeves had her father's dark coloring but her mother's green eyes, a perfect blend of them both. Thomas, now 18 months old and sturdy on his feet, regarded his new sister with solemn curiosity from his perch on Finn's knee. "Baby," he pronounced carefully, reaching out to touch her tiny hand. "That's right, son," Finn said, his heart so full he thought it might burst. "Your sister." As summer returned to the prairie, their small ranch flourished. Finn's cattle herd grew, as did his reputation for fair dealing. Nora's garden expanded to include medicinal herbs, which she dried and sold to Dr. Wilson. Thomas became an energetic toddler with his mother's quick mind and curious nature, while baby Mary proved to have her father's quiet steadiness. One evening, as the sun set in a blaze of orange and purple, Finn and Nora stood on their porch watching Thomas chase fireflies in the yard. Mary slept against Nora's shoulder, one tiny hand curled around her mother's finger. "Did you ever think we'd end up here?" Nora asked, leaning against her husband's solid frame. "That day on the trail when you found me?" Finn wrapped his arm around her waist, drawing her closer. "Never in my wildest dreams. I was just trying to build a shelter before the rain fell." "You built much more than that," she said softly. "You built a home. A family." "We built it together," he corrected, pressing a kiss to her temple. "And I thank God every day that I took that trail and found you." As twilight deepened into night, they called Thomas in from his play. Together, they settled their children for sleep. Thomas in his small bed, chattering about the fireflies, and Mary in her cradle, dreaming baby dreams. Later, lying beside Nora in the darkness, Finn listened to the soft breathing of his family and marveled at how life could change. 5 years ago, he'd been a lonely, bitter man working the mines, convinced that happiness wasn't meant for him. Now, love surrounded him, as tangible as the woman in his arms. "I love you, Nora Reeves," he whispered against her hair. "And I love you," she replied, nestling closer. "My cowboy who built a shelter from the storm." Outside, a gentle rain began to fall, pattering on the roof of the home they'd created together, a home built not just of wood and nails, but of second chances, unexpected love, and the courage to begin again.